In Module 2, we have briefly reviewed API. We have seen how client and server or frontend and backend will send and receive request and response. We even talked about different type of response, such as JSON. In this module, we want to go deeper. First, we're going to start by reviewing the fundamentals of API and different types of them. What you need to understand in order to work appropriately with APIs. Then we're going to talk about how you can manage and create APIs in FlutterFlow. Then we're going to talk about API interceptor, what it means, when to use them, and how to work with them and create one in FlutterFlow. Then you will also learn how to test your APIs in FlutterFlow and what possibilities are available. And then we're going to talk about one of the most important APIs right now for modern application, especially for applications that are having real-time communications, stream APIs. Then we're going to see the generated code and how all of this will going to be reflected in our generated code. This module reveals many concepts about APIs. You may utilize some or all of these concepts to successfully implement an API call in your project. So let's get started. Let's start by answering the very first question. What is an API? Simply put, an API or application programming interface is like a waiter in a restaurant. Imagine you are at a restaurant looking at a menu. You tell the waiter what you want, and then waiter delivers your order to the kitchen. Once it's ready, the waiter brings the food back to your table. In this analogy, you are the client, the kitchen is the server, and the waiter is the API. In technical terms, an API allows two different systems, like your application and a web server, to talk to each other. It is middleman that carries your request, ensures it is understood, and then returns the data or service that you asked for. To work with APIs, you must first understand how the web works. Most APIs are built on HTTP, the protocol browsers use to fetch web pages. HTTPS is the secure version of HTTP that is used extensively these days. The first example of calling an API is entering a URL in the browser. In this case, you send a request to the server and receive a response, which can be the entire web page or the HTML. An API is typically a URL with a protocol like HTTP, a base, an endpoint, and sometimes even query parameters. But instead of loading an entire web page, most APIs send and receive smaller pieces of data, often in formats like JSON. HTTP is the language that both your client and server speak. This language is built on essential concepts like headers, query parameters, and HTTP method. To use APIs effectively, you need to understand HTTP methods. Think of HTTP method as verbs that describe the action you want to perform. The most common ones are get, put, post, delete, and patch. Let's talk about them. Get is the most common method. When you use get, you ask the server to send you some data. For example, you'd use a get request if you want to retrieve a list of users from an API. It's like saying, give me the information I need. On the other hand, post. Use post when sending data to server to create a new resource. For instance, if you are signing up as a new user on a website or creating a post, you are using post requests. The post requests usually also send post details in the request body. Think of it as adding new item to the system. The put method is used to update an existing resource. Imagine you have a post in your system that you want to change its title. You'd use a put request to update their information. It's like, here is new data, replace the old data with this. Delete method. As the name suggests, delete removes a resource from the server. For example, you'd send a delete request if you want to delete a post with a specific unique ID. It's saying like, please remove this item from the system. Patch method. As the name suggests, patch is used to partially update a resource. It is useful when you want to update only few fields of a resource without replacing the entire resource. Let's see what we have seen quickly. We started with get. So that means retrieves a list. For example, get post retrieves a list of posts. Get post with a specific ID retrieves the details of a specific post by their ID. The post method then that creates a new post. The put with a specific ID updates the details of an existing post. And then delete within a specific unique ID would delete a specific post. Okay, what you have learned is just REST API. In REST APIs, everything revolves around these resources and the HTTP methods you use to interact with them. This approach makes API intuitive, easy to use because it follows a clear and consistent structure and language. The good thing is that when you create APIs in FlutterFlow, it allows you to group the calls, which is an excellent example of when you should group REST APIs for a specific resource, such as posts or products, and etc. One more thing. You probably noticed that we are sending body data in the put, patch, and post requests. Let's talk about body now. The most common type of body is JSON format, which is the easiest way of passing data inside the request. But that's not it. There are other types, such as text, multipart, and form URL encoded. First, we have the text format. This is the simplest form of request body, where the data is sent as a plain text. You might use this when the server expects a straightforward data string, such as sending plain text content or XML. Don't worry if you don't know what XML is. Generally, it's another format for sending data to server, similar to JSON. Some APIs, such as SOAP API, which you're probably gonna hear or use or have heard, may require sending XML. Next, we have form URL encoded, often simply called URL encoded. This format is used primarily in web forms. Here, data is encoded as key value pairs separated by ampersands and is URL safe, meaning it can be easily transmitted over the web. Imagine you are submitting a login form. The username and password would be encoded like this. Each key value pair is encoded like query parameters in a URL. This compact form works well for simple data submissions, especially when the data is small and doesn't include files or binary data. Finally, there is multipart form data, the most complex of the three. This format is used when sending binary data, like files, alongside text data. It splits the data into multiple parts, each with its own content type, making it ideal for forms that include file uploads. For example, if you're submitting a form with a profile picture and some text fields, the request body might look like this. Each data part is separated by a boundary marker, allowing the server to distinguish between different data types like the text field and files. In FlutterFlow, when you select multipart, it's often associated with an uploaded file. All right. So far, we have talked about HTTP methods and REST APIs. But when we talk about HTTP and REST APIs, headers become very important. But let's talk about headers. What are headers? Think of headers as extra information attached to your API request or response. Just like when you send a letter, you write the recipient's address and the return address on the envelope. Headers provide similar context, such as the type of data being sent or authentication details. HTTP headers are mainly grouped into two categories. Request headers contain more information about the resource to be fetched or the client requesting this resource. Response headers hold additional information about the response that server returns. Typically, you can send headers with requests, and server will send you headers with responses. Some of the common request headers that you might need to pass while sending requests are authorization and content type. Authorization used for authenticating the request. This can either be given to you or can be retrieved by logging in into a system. Content type used while sending a post put patch request containing a message body. In FlutterFlow, the default content type for any HTTP post request is application JSON. So if your data body isn't in JSON, you can skip defining the content type. But if you want to send something else, you need to define the content type as well. All right, you may ask, what if I want to repeat these data or dynamically pass the information from anywhere in the application? That's where you can define variables. For example, a token variable. In FlutterFlow, variables allow you pass the dynamic values from any part of your app to the API calls. Here's an example of how you can use a variable you define to send an auth token from your app's state to an API calls request header. Just keep in mind that defining variables for API calls can have different types and may also have default values if you want. For example, if you set a limit variable, start with a default value. Next up are query parameters, which allow you to fine-tune your API request. Usually, they are concatenated at the end of the URL with a question mark as the delimiter and are represented as key value pairs and are typically for get methods. Here, start date, end date, and API key are the query parameters passed to receive the specific data related to these parameters. Here's another example. This API call has two query parameters. The limit parameter specifies 20 items to load per page, and the offset specifies the number of items to skip. This is called offset-based pagination. In FlutterFlow, you can also use variables to pass data to query parameters, which means you must first define variables for the API. Then, use these variables when defining the query parameters. Just ensure that the value source is form variable. All right, that's good. So far, we have talked about requests. But now let's see what we can do with a respond when one is sent. After defining requests and API call, you can start testing your calls in FlutterFlow. You can always include all variables in your requests to make your testing more accurate. Once you test the call, you can see the response, where in this example, you'll now see a list of users with some properties in JSON format. After receiving the JSON, we should convert them to custom data types in FlutterFlow. Converting between API response, in this case JSON, and data types is often referred to as JSON deserialization and serialization. It allows you to convert JSON data from an API response into a custom data type when you receive it. Once you define the custom data type, you can parse the response to the type you created. This also enables you to convert your custom data type back into JSON when sending data in an API request. Moreover, this is more robust and maintainable way to work with JSON data in your app. It reduces complexity and potential errors like typos. I strongly recommend always doing this conversion. And finally, you create an API, you parse the data, and now you need to trigger this API. FlutterFlow has two main ways to call APIs, each serving different purposes. First, you can link an API call to a backend query. This method is often used when you want to retrieve and display data automatically when the page loads, much like pulling data from a database or Firebase. The second option is associating an API with an action, like when a user taps a button. Choosing the right method depends on the situation. Backend queries are perfect for preloading data, while event-triggered calls help reduce unnecessary API requests or calls only if it's required. In the backend query, after selecting API call, you can find your API call names. After selecting your calls, you may often need to also specify the variable that you have defined for the API. For example, suppose your API needs an authorization token to pass in the header as you defined. In that case, you should select the value for the specific variable in this example on the screen, token. Then, similar to what you have learned so far, you should be able to find a specific variable, which is often the name of the API that you defined plus the response keyword. In this example, I named it get users, and now I have get users response. You usually have several API response options, including the JSON body, raw body text status code, etc. Each serves a different purpose, but the most important one for showing data is as data type, where you will get access to the custom data type that you define for this response. This helps you access your custom and structured data types and easily select each property for which you need to show data. This is another reason you always define custom data for your API responses. In actions, you can also select API call under the backend database section. The rest of the configuration is the same. You can select the API and set variables that need to be passed to, such as token, and etc. This time, pay attention to the action output variable name, where you can retrieve the response. For example, if you want to call a login button when a user wants to log in and then set a token in the app state, let's call our action output variable name login result. Next, you can find the action output variable name when you set a value. If you already have parsed this API response as a custom data type, you can now access the structured data and select the properties from the response you would want to choose as the value. For example, here in the picture is the token. Beautiful. We have covered quite a lot in this video. Let's now go to the next video and put everything into action. All right, here is my project, and what I'm gonna do right now, I'm gonna go to checkout page and make sure when we are clicking on checkout, we can create an order via an API, a post method, as well as going to the list of orders and loading all the orders via APIs. Okay, so usually when you are going to work with APIs, especially REST API, you will receive some kind of documentation. Here is one type of documentation, Swagger, based on the Open API. So, and as you can see, the APIs, so this is my base URL, and then here is the endpoints that we've been talking so far. And we have different endpoints. For example, for categories, we have different methods. For example, we have delete, get, patch, or post, and even get all these categories. This is REST API. And as you can see, so I have also orders here, which I can add an order record here in this case with some documentation is already here, as well as I can receive all their orders. I can even go to the order details if I can pass the order IDs and receive the order details. This documentation is quite helpful, and you can take a look at like the request body in this case, what you need to do, and even execute it and receive some kind of response to understand what you're receiving. These are the fields, the JSON files that you receive, or these are the fields that you need to post. All right, so now I'm gonna get my base URL. This is the server, and now we know that we have endpoint for orders and then get the orders. We're gonna do these two for now. Going back to my FlutterFlow dashboard, now this time I'm gonna open the API calls. So this Swagger is already supported in FlutterFlow. That's a good news. So if you have such a documentation, you can actually download the JSON and upload it here. And everything you've seen there will be created automatically here. But we're not going to do that because we are testing and we are learning right now. I will go and add a API group right now. Let's call it orders. The base URL so that I have received is this one. And there's no special headers that I need to pass or maybe any other settings here for this group. Let's just add the group. All right, so now my group is created. I'm gonna go and add a call, API call. Let's call it create order. And that should be the post method. And the endpoint was orders. So there was no header needed to be passed. So we needed to pass a body, which in this case was JSON. But let's go ahead and take a look at the documentation one more time. In this post order documentation, it says that we need to at least pass these data. So let me just go ahead and copy this as my response body. Let's go back here and select the body as JSON and paste it here. Beautiful. So this is what we can pass, but we need to replace these fields. So for example, we need to pass total, user ID. So what we can do, these fields that are not necessary, so I'm just going to remove them. And for the rest of this field, let's go ahead and create variables so that I can pass my data to the post. Okay, beautiful. Let's go ahead and do that. We need user ID, which is going to be a string here. Okay, then let's check. We also need total amount, which is a double. And we need product items, which in this case, it should be a custom type, but we have not created that. We can actually select JSON as of now, and it's going to be a list. All right, so these are the variables. Let me go back to body right now. And now I can replace this with the variables that we just defined. All right, let's do the user ID. Here's my user ID, the total amount. And instead of this array of items, which we will come back to this, let's just copy that just to remember it. I will just replace this array with product items. All right, let's format it and looks good. So that's it. So now we can go and test the respond. Let's go to the respond and test. And now I can pass my user ID, total, and product items. So there you go. So if I go to body, you see that I can pass these items. So in fact, I can pass with values. Let's say the total is going to be this, and the product is going to be a JSON in this case, right? So, and the JSON, let's just pass an empty array. Okay, so let's test. Beautiful. So that was deliberate. And you can see now we tested our APIs and it says you have to at least pass one product items here. So, and that's what we need to do. So at least we tested and we know we need to do that. Let's go ahead and do that right now. I'm just going to go and paste the JSON that I copied from the previous tab. So that's it. Not going to change anything else. Let's go ahead and take a look at the body. There you go. Everything is coming. So let's test. Fantastic. So the product is created, user ID, total amount, and even the product items. The only thing is that we need to make sure we pass this JSON to the product items as an array. Okay? Just remember this. And now we even tested that, which is very good. Next thing we can do is we can actually parse this data right now as custom data type, but we have not created anything that is related to this. What we can do, we can go ahead and copy this, and then let's go to the custom data type. So since the response was a JSON, I can simply go to create the custom data type from JSON. Let's call that order response. And then I can paste my JSON here. Beautiful. So then let's see what it does. Create. Voila. And as you can see right now, the custom data type is created based on my JSON. And even I have a product items here, which is including all of this. So I can go back now to my API call. Let's go to the respond. And here, now I can parse my order response. Beautiful. Let's now add this call, and we are good to go. We also want to add the orders get API, and we need to pass user ID to that, and then we will receive an array of order. And as far as I can see, this is the exact response that we received for creating an order. We already created the custom data type for this, which is very good, but we just need to make sure this is an array. So let's go ahead and create the get method for orders. I'm going to add a new call. Let's call it get orders from the same endpoint. Now we just need to define our query param, and that's going to be user ID, which we can define from variable. And let's create a user ID here. And if I go back to my variable, you see that the user ID is here. I can just set the string type. And that's it. All right. So looks good. Let's test it out. I'm going to pass my user ID as 1, 2, 3. Test. And nothing comes. Beautiful. That was expected, because we have not created any order for this user. So let's go and also parse this as order response. And that's going to be a list, though, in this case. All right, beautiful. let's go and add this call as well. Now we have two calls, a get and a post. Let's go and implement this. First, in the order list page, I'm going to select my list view, and then I go to backend query. I'm going to add a backend query here as an API call. And then I do have the groups of the call, and then I can say which endpoint. And that was the get orders. And beautiful. We need to just pass the user ID, which is the authenticated user right now. All right, beautiful. We can even have enable pull to refresh, but I'm not going to do that for this call right now. Let's confirm. And let me make sure that we have a loading. And let's go ahead and change these variables. Let's set the order ID here. So from the variable, and now we have the get orders response. Beautiful. So I'm going to get that as the data type because we parsed it already. Let me make sure that we have a loading widget. Beautiful. Now I'm going to generate my children here so that I have the order right now. Let's go and let's call it orders and set it from the get order response. Beautiful. And then the option that I have are different. So you see that I have JSON body as type, and I have also other ones as well. But we already parsed this respond. So I'm just going to go select as type. Let's confirm and save. And now my children's are generated. So let me just give a little bit of padding to the first one. All right, now let's go ahead and select the order ID and set it from variable, in this case, order item, and from data structure, and that's going to be ID. Let's get the total from data structure, and that's going to be the total amount. And it's a number, decimal, formatted, give it a symbol. Beautiful. We can change the text here for shipping. We already had a shipping status, which is going to be data structure of order status. Beautiful. Let's change the quantity. Going to just change with combine text, quantity, and then the next is going to be the order list, data structure, and the quantity, in fact, is the product items and a number of product items. Good. Let's confirm. All right. So that's all good. So now we have the orders. Now I'm going to my checkout page, and on my checkout button, I'm going to add an on-tap action for API call. Then let's do create order in this case. And let's set all the variables we just defined. We need a user ID, which is the authenticated user as of now. We need the total amount, which we can get it from a custom function that we created, get total cart collection. And we just need to pass the cart item here. It's a list of document, which has quantity and price of product. Beautiful. And now let's add the product items. Though the product item is a little bit tricky here because now we do not have a JSON, and either we need to create a map of JSON here, which is going to be a little bit difficult or time consuming, let's say. Either we need to create the map of JSON manually and get all of the cart items, which products, price, and so on, and map it to a JSON, or we can create custom function. Yes, beautiful. Let's quickly do a custom function. Let's go to the custom function. In fact, what I do need here is a custom action. So let's go and create a new custom action. Let's call it serialize card items. The return value here in this case is going to be a JSON, which is going to be a list of product. And the argument is going to be the items, which in this case, we're going to pass the document here. And that document is our cards, and they are a list of documents. All right, beautiful. So let's take a look at the boilerplate code. Future list of JSON, which is dynamic, and serialized card. And there we go. Let's copy this right now to the editor. All right, what we're going to do, card records. First, I'm defining a list of serialized item, which in this case, it's going to be our JSON. Then I'm going to iterate over each item, and then I'll map that to a JSON. As you can see, I get the title of the product, the price, and the currency. I just manually added USD, and the brand is empty, the quantity, and the image. And then I will add it to this list, and finally, I will just return this list. Beautiful. We're now serializing our card items from Firestore to this item as a JSON. Let me just save this action. Just to remind you about the list, the card records, I'm just going to go to Firestore, and I'll show you the schema of the card. Take a look at that. Then it's going to be the image, price, title, and quantity. Beautiful. And that card is a sub-collection of users, which means a user on their card may have a list of these products with the quantity. Beautiful. So now let's go back to our checkout, to our action. And what we can do here, we can actually add an action here. And that action is going to be our serialized action we just created, the custom one. And that can go above the call. And we can make sure that we are passing our card documents, which is a list of products. And let's just name it product items or serialized product items. All right, let's just copy this. Now I can go to my call, the product items. Let's now go to the action output. Here is my product, the list of JSON, and that's it. So now if the call is successful, so then what we can do, we can just redirect back user to the order list. And if it's not, we can just show a snack bar. All right, good. Now it's time to go ahead and test it out. All right, the app is loading. So if I go to my order page, you see there is nothing here. That's correct. So, and now I can add this item to the bag. There you go. The one item is added. Beautiful. Let's do one more. And you see the quantity is changing. And let's do also this product. And there you go. I have 2 products with 3 quantities. And let's now check it out. And there you go. The order is placed. All good. So, but there's one problem here. And as you can see, our cart item is not cleared. So when we placed an order, and that's not really a good user experience. I'm going to show you a tip here to clearing this cart. So let's review what we want to do here. We want to delete all of these items or the documents from the cart. So let me remind you one more time. I'm going to do my Firebase Firestore. Here is my sub collection, which has multiple product at the moment, right? And just to prove you, I go to my Firestore, and here's my user, here is the cart, and these are the two items. All right, so now I want to delete these two items from the cart because as soon as the order is checked out, we already captured these two. We don't need these two anymore, right? But we captured it in our API, which is in another server. All right, that's all good. Here is the tip I want to show you, and I think you're gonna like this. So first thing first is that we have the cards in this page as our backend query. And this is the card. So it's actually loading the collection of the card for this user, which is the authenticated user. And what we're going to do right now, we're going to go back to the action here. And after we navigate and the success, we're just going to delete all of those cards items. But how should we do that? If I search for Firestore, we don't really have a delete collection or delete documents like all of them. We need to delete them one by one. All right, so that then it's going to delete the entire collection. To do that, you need to add a loop here and set a condition. And as long as the condition is true, then delete the data. But how should we do that here? Here is a tip here. First thing, let's go back and then set a page state. And I'm going to call it document index. And that's going to be an integer. No null, and we start from 0. This is going to be index of each of these items. So like if you have 2 items here, so it's going to be 0 and 1. And if you have 3, it's going to be 0, 1, 2. So we start from 0, which is the index of this array. And now I'm going to go back to my action, go to the loop, and in the loop, let's set a condition. The condition would be the first item is going to be my page state document index. All right. So imagine it's going to be 0 in the beginning. And then it needs to go and be less than the card documents list, a list of card items that we have. So a number of items. So if we have 2 items, then so the number of list items then is going to be 2. So then the 0, we started from 0, is less than 2. So it will continue going to the loop. Beautiful. Let's confirm this. And what do we want to do? We actually want to go to Firestore and delete this document. All right. I'm just going to go and go to the card item. In item at index, for the first time, what is the specific index? Beautiful. Yes, it's going to be our page document index. So we start from 0. So then we get the 0. And if you now see, we can select what do we want. So we want to get the property of the document, and we do need the reference. That's it. So now confirm. And that is going to delete that document in index 0, whatever reference it is. Next, we need to add another action, and we need to go to state management and update our page state, set the field of document index, and make sure we are incrementing by 1. All right, beautiful. So then what is going to happen? If we have 2 items, it's going to be less than 2. Then it's going to delete the 0. So like the first item in the array, then it's incremented by 1. So then 0 becomes 1. Then it goes back again to the loop. It says 1 less than 2, which is fine. Then it's going to delete the index at 2. And then it's going to go and update the page index to 2. And then 2 is not less than the number of items, which at this case, then we're done and the loop is over. Beautiful. So let's go and test this out. I will restart the app. Now I have a card. So let me just add one more. So now we have 3 items. Let's check out. Now we have the second order and there is no item anymore in the checkout. Fantastic. That's exactly what we were looking for. So now we have a combination of using API calls and even using Firestore. I always recommend you to use the custom data type where possible. However, there is another way to retrieve data from JSON path or JSON Paths expressions. JSON Path is a query language for JSON. It allows you to extract specific data from a JSON object or array, making it incredibly useful when working with complex data structures. Think of JSON Path as a way to navigate through your JSON data, similar to how you would find a file in your computer's directory. Let's start with basic example of a JSON to understand better. All right, now let's break some basic JSON Paths syntax. The $sign represents the root of your JSON data. It is like the starting point of your query. If you have a JSON object like this, the JSON path $.store would select the store object. Dot notation is used to access a child element, and bracket notation is used for array elements or when dealing with keys containing special characters. For example, using dot notation, or in this case, using bracket notation for retrieving the book, give us access to the book array. Now you have an array, you can pass an index of an item in an array. Here is an example. When you have the book array, if you pass the number 1, it will select the second item in the array. The wildcard star matches all elements at the current level. Let me give you an example. So if you say store.book and wildcard star, in this case, .title, it will select all the titles in the book array. JSON Paths allows you to select a specific slices of an array using colon. This is useful when you only want a portion of the array. For example, when you say 0:2, it selects the first 2 books in the book array. Filter as question mark and parentheses allow you to select elements based on specific conditions. The condition goes in between of the parentheses. For example, this query right now, the @price less than 10, selects books where the price is less than 10 in our books array. Now that you have learned the basics, you may ask, why using JSON Path? JSON Path is invaluable when dealing with complex JSON structures, especially in scenarios where you need to extract or manipulate a specific pieces of data. Inside the FlutterFlow Builder, you can try adding different JSON paths in real time and suggest various options to get exactly what you are looking for. All right, beautiful. Now let's go back to our demo and start using JSON Path. All right, here is my application, and we have now a list of categories that I want to replace it with an API call. And we also have this select category, which we in fact can replace it with our API calls for the category names. Let's go to API call, and let me just copy the API URL from here and add a new API group. this is going to be the category API group. And there you go. So now let's add an API call. Let's call it get category. And the endpoint is going to be category, as we have seen in this documentation, or we have received it from our API developers. There's nothing else that I need to pass here. All good. So if I now go to respond and test the API call, beautiful. We receive a JSON, and this is how it looks. We're going to have ID, category name, category image. These are what we really want. This time, I'm not going to parse it as a custom data type. In fact, I want to use JSON Paths. So there's already some recommendation here. For example, we can get the category names in this case, or images. So I'm going to go and add this and this one. Let's call this categories name and also images. Let's also add the ID also in this case. Category is ID. All right. So in fact, they are all lists. Maybe I should add an S at the end of all. You can even go ahead and add even more. So these are going to be my predefined JSON path. So as you can see, these are my predefined JSON path. And now we have a list of all of these categories, images, and names. Let me add the call. And that's good. Let's go back now to our product list. What I'm going to do right now, I'm going to go to this column and try to generate this, as well as generating the drop-down labels. So if I go now first to my drop-down label, there are options here that now manually added. Let me just set that from variable. But what could be the variable in this case? It could come from our API call, but in order to do that, what I can do, I can call it when the page is loading. In fact, I can go to backend query and just go to API call on the category, get category, and confirm. Beautiful. So now if I go to dropdown again, I can open my option and set the values from get categories response. And it's already coming as a JSON body. I have not set the custom data type. And I do have the predefined one right now, or you can go ahead and use your own JSON paths if you want. So I'm just going to go use the predefined one. And let's say I'm going to add the names here. Let's confirm. Beautiful. This is category names right now. And how about this one? So that's good. Let me just delete all of these columns. We need to generate them right now based on the API calls. And we have a row here. What I'm going to do right now, I'm going to go and replace this row with a list view first and make sure that is also wrapped with a container. And in my container, I will just give it as an infinite width and a height of probably 100 is good. Now I'm going to my list view properties and let's make sure the axis is horizontal. All right, beautiful. Let's put some spacing between and even probably from start and end. All right. That's good. So now we have this column, list view. That's good. Now we need to generate this list. Let me just go to the list, dynamically generate the categories. Let's give it a variable name. And that comes from get categories respond. All right. This time I'm going to actually use the JSON path and just use the $, which means the root, which is just an array, right? Let me just confirm this and save. Beautiful. So now I can go to my circle image. And here's the path. Let's just go and get it from category items. We know that is already a JSON path. And we already know that is going to be an object, right? So it's an array and we already iterate and now it's an object. So now we have access to category image. All right. Let's repeat that for text as well. So we're going to go to the text. We set that from category item, from JSON path, and that's going to be the category name. Beautiful. Now it's loading with the JSON. All right, that's very good. Let's go ahead and test it out. All right, reloading my application. Fantastic. 2 categories are appearing right now. And the dropdown is also here. If I select this is going to change as well. Beautiful. It's all working.